Hi, I decided to do my author study on Peggy Parish. I had read some of Peggy Parish's books before, but I didn't really know much about her until I started doing this research. Peggy Parish was born on July 14th, 1927 in Manning, South Carolina. When she graduated from the University of South Carolina with a Bachelor of Arts degree in English, she decided to get a job as a teacher. Um, Peggy taught in several states, including Oklahoma, Kentucky, and New York. Peggy has authored over 30 books, but her most famous character is the character of Amelia Bedelia. I had read some Amelia Bedelia books, and I just love this character. I think the reason that Amelia Bedelia is so popular is because she's just an overall good character, and she's almost childlike in her simplicity and in the way that she thinks. So right now I'm going to read one of Peggy's Amelia Bedelia books. It's Amelia Bedelia's Family Album, and it's one that I hadn't read before, so it's just, I hope you enjoy it. Amelia Bedelia's Family Album. Amelia Bedelia, said Mrs. Rogers, you've been here a long time. Oh, Mrs. Rogers, said Amelia Bedelia, are you tired of me? Of course not, said Mr. Rogers. We want to have a party for you. We want to meet your family. Now that is nice, said Amelia Bedelia. Who would you like to invite? Asked Mrs. Rogers. I'll get my family album, said Amelia Bedelia. You can help me decide. Good idea, said Mr. Rogers. Amelia Bedelia got her album. This is my daddy, said Amelia Bedelia. He is a telephone operator. Then he helps people make calls? Said Mr. Rogers. He does not, said Amelia Bedelia. He operates on telephones. I see, said Mr. Rogers. This is my mamma, said Amelia Bedelia. She's a loafer. You mean she does nothing? Said Mrs. Rogers. Certainly not, said Amelia Bedelia. She works hard. She makes dough into loaves of bread. That's what a loafer does. I see, said Mrs. Rogers. This is Uncle Albert, said Amelia Bedelia. He is a big game hunter. You mean he kills animals? Asked Mrs. Rogers. Why would he do that? Said Amelia Bedelia. He hunts big games. He has one so big that it takes up the entire room. I see, said Mrs. Rogers. Next is Aunt Mary, said Amelia Bedelia. She is a bank teller. Then she cashes checks, said Mr. Rogers. No, said Amelia Bedelia. She tells everybody in the bank where to go. Some folks don't like that. I see, said Mr. Rogers. This is Cousin Calvin, said Amelia Bedelia. He is a boxer. Does he win any matches? Asked Mrs. Rogers. Amelia Bedelia looked puzzled. Matches, she said. Why would he win matches? A boxer packs boxes. He gets paid money. I see, said Mrs. Rogers. Cousin Edward is a horse racer, said Amelia Bedelia. Oh, he is a jockey, said Mr. Rogers. I don't think so, said Amelia Bedelia. Cousin Edward races horses. He almost won once, but he tripped and he fell. I see, said Mr. Rogers. Uncle Ned is a cook, said Amelia Bedelia. He works in a hotel. Then he's a chef, said Mrs. Rogers. No, said Amelia Bedelia. He's a doorman. His name is Ned Cook. I see, said Mrs. Rogers. Uncle Dan takes pictures, said Amelia Bedelia. What kind of pictures does he take? Asked Mrs. Rogers. Oh, any kind, said Amelia Bedelia. You really have to watch him. He will take every picture in the house. I see, said Mr. Rogers. Cousin Bee has a fun job, said Amelia Bedelia. She balances checkbooks. I wish she would balance mine, said Mrs. Rogers. She will, said Amelia Bedelia. She can balance 20 at one time. I see, said Mrs. Rogers. My brother Ike wants an orange grove, said Amelia Bedelia, but he has had bad luck. How is that? Asked Mr. Rogers. He orders orange trees, said Amelia Bedelia, but they all come out green. I see, said Mr. Rogers. This is poor Cousin Chester, said Amelia Bedelia. He's a printer. What does he print? Asked Mrs. Rogers. Everything, said Amelia Bedelia. We could never teach him proper writing. I see, said Mr. Rogers. Cousin Clara is a bookkeeper, said Amelia Bedelia. She must be good with numbers, said Mrs. Rogers. No, but she is good at keeping books. She never returns one. I see, said Mr. Rogers. Cousin Ella works with clay, said Amelia Bedelia. Is she a potter? Asked Mrs. Rogers. I don't know any potters, said Amelia Bedelia. Ella and her husband, Clay, have a bakery. I see, said Mrs. Rogers. Uncle Alf is a garbage collector, said Amelia Bedelia. That is smelly work, said Mr. Rogers. It sure is, said Amelia Bedelia. All of his neighbors moved away. I see, said Mr. Rogers. Cousin Susan belongs to a fan club, said Amelia Bedelia. Are there many fans in her club? Asked Mr. Rogers. Oh, yes, said Amelia Bedelia. You never saw so many different kinds of fans. I see, said Mr. Rogers. My niece Lulu stuffs olives, said Amelia Bedelia. Does she stuff the pimento in the middle? Asked Mrs. Rogers. No, said Amelia Bedelia. She stuffs olives into herself. I see, said Mrs. Rogers. The last picture is of Ollie, said Amelia Bedelia. He is my nephew. Ollie is our catcher. What does he catch? Asked Mrs. Rogers. Everything, said Amelia Bedelia. Mumps, measles, colds, whatever comes along. Ollie catches it. What an unusual family, said Mrs. Rogers. Yes, said Mr. Rogers. Invite them all to the party. All right, said Amelia Bedelia. She left the room. In a bit she came back. They will be here tomorrow, she said. Tomorrow, said Mrs. Rogers. We can't get everything ready by then. What's to get ready? Asked Amelia Bedelia. Food, said Mr. Rogers. Now, Mr. Rogers, said Amelia Bedelia, my folks know about parties. They will bring the food. But Amelia Bedelia, said Mrs. Rogers, will there be enough food for everybody? Everybody, said Amelia Bedelia. I hadn't thought of inviting everybody. What a good idea. She ran outside. Here, here, she shouted. A party tomorrow. Everybody come. And everybody came. The end. That was such a good book. And she is, I think, when Peggy passed away on November 19th, 1988, her nephew, Herman Parrish, decided to keep her character of Amelia Bedelia alive by continuing to write books about her. And these are like some of the ones that he's written. I can read books. The activity that I've chosen is Amelia Bedelia books are full of idioms. And I thought a good one for kids to do would be to match up the idioms. You can write them on, have two separate papers and then have them match up, like shake a leg means the same thing as hurry up. So that's the activity that I chose for kids to do with the Amelia Bedelia books, because learning about idioms is important.